Welcome back! Today we're at the Chicago O'Hare Airport. Today we'll be flying the long-haul flight from Chicago to London with a European business class flight from London to Munich. We made it to the airport about 3 hours early, which is the suggested time, although it never takes that long for us. We found the British Airways desks with no issue. However, there aren't any unmanned baggage drops at Chicago for British Airways, so we had to queue up. Even though we were in business class, we had to wait in line for about 25 minutes. They do have business class lines, but it was just that busy. After getting through security, we made our way to the British Airways Terraces lounge in Terminal 5. However, like the other lounges in Terminal 5, this lounge lacks some outside views, and it was just dark and dingy. It wasn't a very pleasant experience to sit here. The lounge did offer some food options and, of course, plenty of drinks. There's also plenty of seating options, from tables to couches to chairs, which is spread out over several different rooms. It's really a disjointed area. The staff here was great, and they did offer table service, which was nice. We didn't spend very much time here before boarding was called for our flight. Today, we were flying on British Airways Airbus A380, and we were really excited about it. We were looking forward to getting some great views of the plane from the terminal, but unfortunately, we really couldn't see that well outside of the terminal windows. So, here's a picture of the plane for you. We made our way down the jet bridge and to our seats, which was on the upper deck of this plane. This plane is absolutely massive, holding a staggering 469 passengers, 303 of which are in economy, 55 in premium, 97 in business class, and 14 in the open-air first-class seats. Business class seats, or Club World as they call it on British Airways, are in a bit of an odd configuration on this plane. It's a 2-4-2 layout in business class, with seats facing opposite directions. We were in seats 51J and K today, which are the second to the first row of seats to the front. I chose to sit in the backwards-facing seat at the window. I just couldn't help myself. From this seat, you get an amazing view of the huge wing and beautiful Rolls-Royce engines. We got comfortable in our seats and enjoyed a pre-departure beverage. However, the captain came on pretty soon and said we'd be leaving a little bit late. Due to the massive size of this plane, it takes a lot to move it around the airport. They need to close taxiways and some of the internal airport roads in order to get it to the right runway. With that new information, we took a moment to get acquainted with our seats. The seat has all of the standard buttons you'd expect to move it into the lie-flat position, as well as to get into comfort mode. There is also a button to put up the shade between yourself and your seat partner, which Catherine found out wasn't meant to be opened manually a little bit later in the flight. There's actually a decent amount of storage in these seats, with most of the storage being by the footwell. If you're sitting in a window seat, however, you do have storage cubbies to your other side, which came in very handy, although they wouldn't open for me. This is supposed to be easy, right? The IFE screen comes out from between the seats. While this is good in theory, the springs were so old that it didn't hold it in place, especially for these backwards-facing seats. When we hit some turbulence later in the flight, I couldn't watch TV at all because it kept folding inward. There is also a footrest that comes down from in front. If there's somebody sitting in the seat opposite you and they have their footrest down, you have to climb over them to get out of the seat. Even though British Airways boasts that all of their seats in business class have aisle access, that's really not true if you have somebody sitting there with the footrest down. As far as space, these seats are actually very spacious, and if you're in the window, you get even more space. It felt like I had my own little office up here. Finally, we started our pushback and our long taxi out to the runway. We were taxiing for about 20 minutes until we finally lifted off. As we flew out over the cloudy Chicago skies, we were given our menus and a hot towel to get ready for dinner. As I put my tray table down, I found another flaw with the seat design, especially for the backwards-facing ones. We were given some mixed nuts and another beverage. It was a bit annoying on this flight that the flight attendants came around and asked us for both our pre-dinner beverage and our dinner beverage choice before we even saw the menu. How was I supposed to know what I wanted to drink with dinner before I knew what I was going to eat? Anyway, that slight annoyance passed, and we took a look at the menu. Tonight was a choice between a roast beef, pumpkin, or cream of broccoli soup appetizer, and for the entree we were given a choice of the grilled beef fillet, cod masala, or a pasta dish. I went for the pumpkin appetizer, and it was actually really good. For the main, I went with the beef fillet, of course, which was also cooked very well, though it wasn't presented the best. I had no issue cleaning my plate. For dessert, I had the cheese and crackers with the grapes and a little bit of honey. It was a great way to finish off the meal. Now that dinner was done, we took a look at the in-flight entertainment option. The overall layout of this in-flight entertainment is quite old, and to be honest, seemed very dated. There unfortunately were not that many movies that you could pick from. The system was responsive, however, and was actually pretty nice. There was also a great in-flight map, which I spent a lot of time on. There are 3 bathrooms in the upper deck business class cabin of the A380, and the front 2 are absolutely massive. There are also plenty of amenities here. After sleeping for a short while, we started descending into London. It was at this time that we were presented with our breakfast. Unfortunately, we didn't get any video of our breakfast, but here's a picture. We had a choice between this egg muffin and a wrap. The breakfast was very good. Finally, we made our final descent over downtown London into London Heathrow, which was actually a very bumpy descent and not very comfortable. We arrived about an hour late to Terminal 5 at London Heathrow. Luckily, our connecting flight was also in Terminal 5, so we didn't have to deal with the eccentricities of the connection system here in London. Terminal 5 at Heathrow was actually quite nice, and we made our way up to the Club Lounge, where we'd spend the next hour and a half before our next flight. This lounge is leaps and bounds better than the British Airways lounge in Chicago. There's plenty of seating here, plenty of food, plenty of drink, and everything looks fairly new. There's also great views out to the apron and beyond. This was really a great place to spend the morning, although it was extremely crowded. We got a few things to eat. After all, we were still quite stuffed from all the food on our flight. And of course, got a much needed cup of coffee. Then we enjoyed some views out to the apron. Eventually, it was time to board our connecting flight. We made our way down to the gate and onto our plane. For this flight, we were flying on a British Airways A380 in Club Europe, which is the business class for European flights. These seats are just regular economy seats with a middle seat block, although at least they had this little tray here, which was nice. We took a look at the menu before we pushed back from the stand and were on our way. It was a dreary day here in London, but we enjoyed the soft patter of the rain against the windows as we took off. Our flight was only 2 hours, so we just got one meal, which was another breakfast. Second breakfast, if you will. It was an egg bake, and it was actually very good. The service was a little disappointing on this flight. After they gave us our breakfast, The flight attendants were nowhere to be seen. Eventually, we arrived at our destination. So what did we think of this British Airways business class experience? First, let's talk about the lounges. The British Airways Terraces lounge in Chicago really disappointed us. It's a dark and dingy space, and the room layout makes no sense. It almost looked like they had some extra rooms in the airport, so they turned it into a lounge. It basically seems like they plopped a bunch of chairs in a few rooms, added some food, and that's what you get. There are no views outside, and it really wasn't a great place to be. The British Airways lounge in Terminal 5 at Heathrow, however, was actually really nice. We would much rather spend an hour here than in Chicago. The Terraces lounge in Chicago earns a 2 out of 5. The only redeeming quality which kept it from being a 1 was the staff, which were extremely nice and helpful. However, the lounge in London will give a 4 out of 5. It was much better, if not just a bit crowded. Now let's talk about the seats. For the space, the seat was actually pretty good. However, the layout was very odd, and you can tell that they did this layout to try to cram as many business class seats as possible into the cabin. If you're in an aisle seat, or any of the middle seats, you'll notice that it's a much tighter fit than many other business classes. Not only that, but the seats were very old, and I had issues with my IFE screen, my tray table, the footrest, and even the cubbies by the windows. Overall, we would have to rate these seats a 2 out of 5. Now let's talk about the food. Overall, the catering was decent on this flight. It was average. There really wasn't anything that blew us away. It was odd that they asked for our drink orders for dinner and pre-dinner drinks before we even took off or saw a menu, which made the experience a little bit worse. However, they did have several options for starters, as well as the typical 3 options for mains. The meal on our European flight was also good. We'll give the food a 3 out of 5. So what about the service? Well, the service on our flight from Chicago to London was actually very good. Our flight attendants were very attentive and very friendly. The service from London to Munich was a different story, though. Our flight attendants basically brought us our first drink, our food, and then disappeared for the rest of the flight. Because of this, we'll have to rate the service a 3 out of 5. So now let's talk about the value for money. Overall, we thought we got a great value with this flight. These flights were the return from our initial flight from Barcelona through London to Chicago. The total cost for this round-trip flight was €3,176 for 2 people. That's really not too bad and comes out to a little bit over €1,500 per person for business class on a round-trip flight. Not only that, but it was technically a multi-city flight since we flew out of Barcelona as our origin and flew to Munich as our return. We had a decent experience on British Airways. It was an awesome chance for us to ride on the beautiful Airbus A380, which we really don't get that much coming from Munich. Not only that, but we were in the upper deck seats, which was amazing. It's just a shame that we had issues with the service and the seats. Other than that, this was a great experience. However, in future trips, we'll probably be looking for alternative airlines for our transatlantic flights.